David. So David's the creator of Ruby on Rails, and David's releasing some new features, and all he wants to do is have an engaging Q&A with his online audience. So David looks at the options available, like GoToWebinar, WebEx, On24, but they're crazy expensive, super complicated, and have no engagement. Luckily, David cares about Crowdcast, which takes the best features from Google Hangouts and pairs them with the analytics tools of webinars. David goes to Crowdcast, types in the name of the event, when it's going to get started, and hits enter. And bam, just like that, the event is ready with a customizable URL to share. So David shares that URL on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, and even embeds it onto his homepage. Now, meet Courtney. So Courtney is actually building a dating website using Rails. Courtney sees David's tweet, clicks on it, goes to the registration page, and now with one click via Facebook, Twitter, or Google+, joins the event. So let's actually show you what that looks like. So Courtney's actually now in the live event, and she notices there's a couple ways she can interact with David. First is chat, where she can actually influence what David is saying in real time. She can meet the other members of the audience and even take conversations offline. And of course, if Courtney is trolling, David can block her. Then there's questions and topics. Courtney can see the top questions from all the audience in a Reddit-like feed. She sees that someone named Karina actually asked a really interesting question. What's your advice for anyone wanting to start a business? Now, as you know, Courtney's starting her own business, so she upvotes that question to help bubble it up to the top. Now, when Courtney's ready, she can, of course, ask her own question. Now, Courtney was actually a little bit late, and looks like David answered 3 questions already. In fact, the first one has 225 votes, and it says, Twitter swapped Ruby on Rails for Scala, among other things. What do you think is the reason for that? Now, check this out. She clicks on View Answer.
It's a very common question. It's completely fair. There's a lot of angles on that. Let me just tackle a couple of them. The first thing I would say is,
and bam! Just like that, she was able to dive right to the point in the video where David started answering that question. How did that happen? Magic. Finally, there's polls. So now David can ask Courtney questions like, have you programmed with Rails before? And it looks like 422 people said yes, 403 people said no. So about 50-50. Now, David loves this because now, after the event is over, David can actually send a message to the people who has never used Rails before. David also wants to know, what continent are you from? And surprisingly, there's a lot of people from South America and Europe showing up, something that neither Courtney or David expected. Now, the event goes really well and ends. And Courtney notices that David's talk was actually part of a much larger event, a whole virtual conference being held online on Crowdcast. And she notices her hero, Tim O'Reilly, was one of those speakers. So she clicks on Tim, and now, thanks to Crowdcast, is able to go to the best moments of that talk automatically. Now, the event you just witnessed was a real event. We actually had 30,000 people from all over the world interacting with 36 speakers. We think this was the world's largest developer conference ever. Now, after the event, Courtney actually goes and does her own Crowdcast where she teaches people or gives advice on dating. Since then, people like WordSesh have actually used Crowdcast to do a fully virtual 24-hour Crowdcast. And people like Oclairno have used Crowdcast to do community meetings with teachers. We are Crowdcast. We are launching now, and we are hiring. Thank you for having us.
Okay, you got done with 15 seconds left on the clock, which will be added to your Q&A time. Okay, thoughts?
What's your bread and butter customer? Like, who do you want to sell this to? Is this like Jason, who does webcasts, or is this like someone at home? Like, who's your best customer for this?
So there's 2. One is the conference creators who want to do virtual conferences. And we're right now uniquely positioned to just do that because no other software lets you do that. In fact, you would have to stick together a bunch of different software to do that. The second one is people who want to sell things, right? Like webinar customers. So Crowdcast, one of the main benefits of Crowdcast is the engagement you can have in that webinar, right? Where you can see what the top questions are, you can see, you can get the extra data on the audience, and you can filter out who are the most engaged members of the audience, right? Who are the ones who are actually going to be converting for your sale?
I think it's fantastic, and I think it's going to get used by an awful lot of people. Do you guys have any technical limitations? Like you said, 30,000. Could you do something for 100,000? You know, could you reinvent, you know, a radio podcast, for example?
We've only tested it for 40,000. If you can push it, great. We're willing to scale for that. We don't have to focus on video scaling because we're offloading that to other software. So we're just focused on the interaction right now. So yes, theoretically it's possible.
And could you see other videos? So is it just a single?
Yes, I mean in that event, for example, you can jump to any one of 36 talks, and they're already recorded. You can jump to the best moments.
How are you tagging? You know, you said it was magic, but how are you guys tagging? Is it manual, or do you have an automated way of going in and looking at the answers?
So when you're presenting, you have all these questions in front of you, and what you do is you click on Start Answering, and from your point of view, it highlights the talk. From the viewer's point of view, it's like a laser pointer.
Sure.
In the background, you're keeping the timestamps to jump to that point.
This is awesome. I can see using this immediately. Thank you for doing the work to make this happen. Can you talk about who will be your sources of revenue? How might you charge?
Yeah, right now we are not charging yet, but our plan is to, up to 1,000 people in your audience, it'll be free. But if you want their data, then you need to jump to the first tier. Things like names, emails, location. We can tell you the most influential people in the audience, things that no one else is doing. And then there's tiered plans up until the enterprise plan. Right now we already have customers using this during the private beta. Enterprise customers, education companies, and sales companies.
You mentioned that you leverage someone else's video technology right now. Is that the plan moving forward, or?
It's what we're doing right now is to piggyback off of other people's video streaming technology to get to the point where we can build out our own solution.
Okay. My second question: 36,000 people. How did you do that?
Lots of marketing. We teamed up with a company called Hossain, which wanted to pull off this crazy event, and so they handled all the marketing, getting all the speakers and all that. All we had to do is focus on the technology. And so, luckily, and the event was for charity, so all we have to say, hey, DHH, sit where you're going to sit and turn on your screen, and suddenly you'll have thousands of people in front of you. It's a very easy thing to say.
You should pitch Jason on using this for this weekend.
Well, or Betsy if we're doing it on the Glenn Beck show. I mean, Betsy, the call-in show could be reinvented here, and with this tool, I mean, how much do you guys spend on bandwidth and hosting? I mean, it's tens of thousands of dollars a month, I'm certain.
Well, Jason, in addition to that, you know, around any major news event, State of the Union, a debate, any kind of Republican or Democratic debate with the presidential election coming up, all media publishers do. You know, we use Spreecast, we use a bunch of different vendors to talk to our audience. This looks like a much better.
In fact, there's some politicians in Florida using this for their town hall meetings.
And in terms of controlling who the next speaker is, this is using the Google Hangouts API as like the core of it. Is that correct?
No, well, not for the next speaker part. So what happens is if you're the viewer, we just hit a button saying, come to the next talk.
But what about questions though? Are they only submitted by text or do they come on air? How does that work?
Oh, right now it's just by text.
Right.
So you vote up each other's question, it bubbles up to the top. But we actually are planning to have a feature where you can, let's say you ask the number one question, we hit a button, it pops up on screen, do you want to come onto the stage? And you can say yes, and you can join them on that hangout and be part of the show.
Yeah, see, I think that's where it gets super interesting, that if you ask a fantastic question, it gets voted up, you get to ask it live and give your rebuttal.
Yeah.
Because people ask like, oh, can you do questions here at the launch festival? I'm like, well, we kind of have picked amazing judges. The chances of the audience having, you know, overall on average better questions is unlikely. Yeah. But the chances of somebody in the audience having a better question than all the judges is likely, if that makes sense. So on average, the audience will have worse questions than the judges, but I bet you there's one question that is better than any one we've thought of. But there's no way for us to find that one without sitting through 5 attorneys or accountants or headhunters, you know, saying, I'm Jason from Acme Headhunters, we do this, let me ask you an inane question about myself. Right? We struggle with this every event, and that's why we don't take questions from the audience, because it's always terrible.
Yeah, so next year you're going to use Crowdcast, right?
Maybe. I mean, we'll see how the company goes. Any more questions? All right, let's hear it for Crowdcast. Okay, so we had one company drop out of the segment that's going to go tomorrow. So you only got to judge 4. I apologize to my judges, but you did a great job. And I'm going to ask you the same question.